Thank you, everybody. Delighted to be here. Thank you particularly to the Polish Economics Network. I'm always delighted to come and speak with new societies trying to move forward the economics profession. And I just want to say from the beginning, apologies for my total lack of Polish. Somewhat shameful given that I have a great-grandparent from Poland, but I will do my best to learn a few words whilst I'm here. So I have some slides to show you. If we can move forward to the first one. My topic today is rentier capitalism, which is a term that is becoming increasingly popular within the academic world, not so much in the world of politics or policy. You don't see many politicians use the word rentier. I'm still waiting, to be honest. So if any of you do hear some politician say that word, please drop me an email, because I'd like to make a note. Nevertheless, amongst particularly heterodox and political economists like myself, there is increasing recognition that the real challenge facing capitalism or modern economies is not so much the battle between capital and labor as Marx and some of the classical political economists viewed it, but it is the battle between the rentier class and labor and what you might call productive industrial capitalists and capitalism. And I don't think, although there has been more attention in academia to this problem, that there has been less in the policy world and in politics. And my mission, in one sense, is to try and move that agenda forward. So these are a couple of the books over the last 10 years that have focused in on this problem. If we move forward, please, for the next slide. So what do we mean by rent, by economic rent? Well, the classical economists, Adam Smith, we just heard Adam Smith's name mentioned by Jan, Karl Marx, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, were all very aware of the fact that there were three classes in the capitalist system, and that it was dangerous to ignore the rentier class. And the reason for that is very simple. It's illustrated by this equation that capitalist profits, the surplus generated by capitalist production, is what is left over once the capitalists' costs have been subtracted from the revenue that they receive from selling their products. And of course their main costs are labor costs, wages, and the rents that they must pay to that class which owns the scarce resources required for the production process. So one definition of economic rent is the return from ownership or control over a scarce asset under conditions of limited or zero competition. So that's a simple definition, but it sort of helps to have an example. The best known form of rent, of course, is the ownership of land. If you own land, you own a commodity that is rather obviously absolutely needed for any form of capitalist production. Even the most sophisticated platform company requires some land to house the data processing server, and also requires energy, another very important resource, which, as we have seen, is becoming, in some senses, more scarce. In other senses, if we can move to a greener world, less scarce. But even those sort of companies require land. So why were the classical political economists called political economists? It was because they understood the central role of the state in determining the distribution of income between these three classes, three capitalist classes. And their focus was very much on the rentier class and how to reduce the rentier share of income. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a quote from Adam Smith, widely seen as the founder of of modern day economics, and certainly more liberal versions of economics, laissez-faire, free market economics. Many people associate him with modern day neoliberal policy. But in fact, he was absolutely focused on limiting this rentier share. And here is a famous quote from him. Landlord's right has its origin in robbery, and as soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, somewhat cynical here, maybe women had a more generous view, one would hope, love to reap where they never sowed and demand rent for its natural produce. So for those of you who may not understand what that means, where they never sowed essentially means where they made no investment, where they expended no productive effort. You own some land, there is development in the area where you own the land, the government, the local government builds roads, builds schools, builds infrastructure, private businesses invest in nice restaurants or commercial activities, the economy grows, the landlord sits back and charges a higher rent for the land that he owns that costs him nothing, essentially, to provide. So that is the essence of the rentier challenge. Now, the classical economists broadly agreed on this problem of rent, but they were challenged as to how they would remove the problem. Marx, of course, argued that we should simply nationalize infrastructure, nationalize land to solve the problem. The British classical economists were much more in favor of taxing rents. Next slide, please. Now, the problem, and the reason we have such a problem in economics profession today in conceptualizing the problem of rent is that the neoclassical economists essentially have marginalized the concept. Now, it's a bit of a long story how this happened, but this man, John Bates Clark, bears quite a lot of responsibility. He developed a rather fuzzy conceptualization of what he called capital, and argued that whilst in the short term, land and other scarce resources may have some short-run fixed costs that mean they do not smoothly fall into an equilibrium model of the economy, in the long run there was no fundamental difference, that in the long run land, like labor and capital, returned its marginal product. So the theory of marginal productivity essentially elides away rents. It simply, income is rewards for one's contribution to production, and wealth essentially is the savings due to one's productive investment effort. Rents kind of disappear from the picture. They're recognized as sort of short-term, transient phenomena as a new product is created. And Schumpeter shared this concept, Joseph Schumpeter, but there was no recognition that rents could be a more permanent feature of capitalist systems. Indeed, the state was seen not so much as the body that could remove the problem of rents via taxation or socialization or nationalization, but typically the body that created rents. So quite a different role for the state. Next slide, please. Now, my work has focused on, in particular, the role of the financial system and the land market and the housing market, and how these two aspects of our economies have become what I might call rentierized. Many people talk about financialized or commodified. None of these words are very nice. That's probably why politicians don't use them. But essentially, we're talking about a phenomena where these sectors have become focused on generating returns from control over scarce assets and the inflation of the value of those scarce assets. So let's just start with the banking system. One can think of two circuits, two flows for credit and finance. And I'm generalizing heavily here, but this is what one might call the productive circuit of credit. A business wishes to expand, a bank makes it a loan for investment or to pay its workers. It then increases its investment and it produces new types of goods, it innovates, GDP transactions are created, new products are sold, we have growth. We have increased wages, we have increased consumption, and we have increased demand. The business then applies for more productive credit, and we have a sort of productive circle of credit and finance, and the interest that is charged on the loan by the bank for the initial loan can be met through the profits generated from the new investment. So we have some form of equilibrium. Then if we move forward, we have if we keep going forward, hopefully we'll find sorry, this slide is a bit messy. Just keep going, keep rolling through. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There we go. Now we have what you might call unproductive or asset market credit cycle, where the loan from the bank is lent against an existing asset, not for the creation of a new productive asset, for new machinery or a new service, or paying people more money, or upskilling people. It is simply a loan against an existing asset. And the easiest one to understand is obviously a loan against an existing house to enable somebody to buy an existing house. The main macroeconomic impact of this type of loan is simply to inflate that asset's price. You are not putting any new money into the productive side of the economy. I mean, you might be if the person selling the house uses the money to invest in businesses, but that's not normally what happens. Normally somebody sells their house, they use that money to buy another house. Okay, and the money simply circulates through the asset market and increases asset prices. And let's not forget, the vast majority of housing transactions are for the purchase of existing homes. They are not for the purchase of new homes. Most mortgage credit does not support the construction of new homes. It supports competition between different actors to purchase existing property. And the more of this credit that you have, the more you're going to push up land values and house prices. And this generally has a negative effect, because what it does is it increases the debt burden on the economy, because you're creating debt, you're creating interest, you're charging interest, but you are not creating any new GDP transactions or investment or productive growth or increases in productivity. So incomes are staying the same, debt levels are rising, and thus consumption, in theory at least, should be falling. In reality, of course, rising house prices and rising wealth enable people, depending on how liberalized the banking system is, to borrow credit against the rising value of their homes, and this can keep consumption sort of trickling along. But it's not a model that can generate sustainable long-term GDP growth. If we go to the next slide, please. So this chart shows you two different forms of lending, forms of credit: mortgage credit in the blue and all other lending, mainly business lending, some consumer credit, but it's mainly lending to businesses in the red, mapped against house prices on the right-hand axis since the 1950s. And what's very clear here, and this is across 17 high-income economies, so we're not including any Eastern European economies here, I'm afraid, but it gives you a picture perhaps of where you may be going if you follow the path taken by high-income European economies, is an explosion in mortgage credit in the 1990s, essentially, as we deregulated and liberalized our financial system. And if we go for the next slide, we should see that period of mortgage market deregulation and financial innovation. So the emergence of mortgage-backed securities, which enabled institutional investors, pension funds, and insurance companies to enter, to put their money into the housing market, which all led, of course, to the global financial crisis, was a key part of that crisis. But what's kind of interesting about this chart is house prices do fall a bit after the GFC, but they don't come down anywhere near to incomes and to their sort of historical relationship, long-term equilibrium relationship. So a kind of clear correlation there between rising mortgage credit and rising house prices. Next slide, please. And one more. So at the heart of this problem is this combination of a liberalized banking system, particularly liberalized mortgage market, allowing banks to become primarily mortgage lenders rather than business lenders. And if you allow a bank, if you say to a bank, we don't mind who you lend to, you can lend for home purchase or you can lend to a small business, your typical bank, large bank anyway, a national bank, a shareholder-owned bank, will always opt for the mortgage loan for a very simple reason, that the collateral being offered is much more secure and the loan is typically larger than a loan to a small business, where the transaction costs are very high, the risk is higher. So it needs to be understood that there is a fundamental bias in a liberalized banking system towards rentier-type loans against existing assets. And what happens as house prices rise, as more credit is extended, is of course the demand for housing as a financial asset increases, and the demand for mortgage credit increases, and the collateral backing the loans increases. So banks make more loans, house prices go up, and we go round. And if we move forward two more, please. Just keep going. There we go. We've got the full picture now. What have states done to counter this dynamic? They have made it worse. They've made it worse. They've subsidized the demand for home ownership as opposed to subsidizing the provision of affordable housing, including social housing, social rent, housing for rent. And they've privatized social housing and affordable housing. And this, of course, essentially what they're doing is they're subsidizing the banking system. In doing so, they're saying, we will cover the costs, the risk facing you as a bank for making this mortgage loan. And in doing so, they've pumped even more money into the housing market. And what must be remembered with housing is inherently limited supply of homes in desirable locations. And that the business model of developers, private developers, is not to build out homes at a rate that would push down house prices, because that would reduce their profits. So inevitably this money is pushing up house prices further. And the tax system has also worsened this by reducing taxes on property. So if we move forward to the next slide, this just shows you the distribution of taxation within the Eurozone, and you can see here that the vast majority of tax is on income, on labor, and on consumption, and taxes on what you might call rents, land, and maybe environmental rents, environmental taxes, are a tiny proportion of the total tax take in European countries. This is not what Adam Smith would have called a healthy capitalist model. This is a model where people's wages and consumption are being taxed, and thus businesses' profits as well, and the rentier is essentially getting off very, very lightly. Poland, you can see there, is middling in this chart. Next slide, please. The result of all of this, particularly in the countries that have pushed this model hardest, has been falling home ownership. So that's the great paradox of this housing finance cycle of a liberalized mortgage market and a policy framework that support private home ownership above other tenures, is a reduction in home ownership as house prices rise above people's incomes and total home ownership then falls. Younger people find it impossible to buy homes. It's impossible to buy a home in London, in Manchester, in large UK cities if you're a nurse, if you're a teacher, if you're a policeman, if you're a fireman. You will simply never be able to own a home. And these dynamics have spread across Europe, and I believe they may be occurring here in Poland as well, looking at the latest data. So next slide, please. So that's the housing finance rentier story. I just want to briefly talk you through a couple of other sectors where we see these similar rentier dynamics. This is the kind of non-financial sector rentier story, essentially in these two charts. On the left-hand side, we show, this is from an article by Deliria Veliva from last year. It shows you the percentage of sales, it shows you the amount of dividends paid out by companies to shareholders as a percentage of total sales of the firm, turnover of the firm, and the percentage of share buybacks. So that is where a company uses its profits either to pay its owners or to buy back shares from its owners, basically in order to increase its share price and thus inflate its value on the stock market. And of course, senior executives in many of these large companies are remunerated based not on their not on their sales or the sort of investment they're making in the economy, but on the share price, the short-term share price, the quarterly share price. So these are other examples of pumping up asset prices. And as you can see on the right-hand side, at the same time, capital investment, capital accumulation by non-financial firms has been falling. So instead of investing, non-financial firms across the world, the developed world, have been giving more money back to their wealthy share owners rather than investing. Next slide, please. And we've already heard from Jan a little bit about the concept of platform rentiers or digital rents, which I've done a little bit of work on. It's not my area of expertise. But of course, what's most startling here is the incredibly rapid growth of the big 5 US big tech firms who have, for the first time in 42 years, account for 20% of the S&P market cap. First time ever, well, so first time in 42 years that all 5 of those firms have come from one sector, the technology sector. And these businesses have very distinctive business models. They have a policy of basically buying up their competitors potential competitors, before they reach a size that could threaten them. They scale extraordinarily rapidly because as more people join these platforms, they essentially harvest information from people, which enables and monetize that information, sell it to advertisers, and use that information to sell new products, and essentially dominate their ecosystems, force smaller potential competitors to work with them. And of course, they then have increasing marginal returns as opposed to decreasing marginal returns, which is the standard economic theory of the firm, that as you get larger, it's harder to increase your returns. So our kind of regulatory system is not set up for this type of model. Next slide, please. So overall, we can kind of make a comparison between what you might call industrial capitalism, which arguably was the dominant form in the post-war period from 1945 up to maybe the 1970s, and what might be called rentier capitalism since then. And I've talked about some of these policy spheres already, but just to mention monetary policy, what we've seen with the shift to independent central banks is a macroeconomic framework which prioritizes the control of consumer prices over and above other objectives, including employment, including growth. And one can obviously, not difficult to make an argument that the driver of that has been to protect the real wealth of the rentier class. So if you have high inflation and the prices of goods are growing faster than existing wealth, your real wealth as an asset owner is clearly falling. So there is a strong argument to say we might want to have slightly higher inflation if that can support higher growth and higher real wages. And on the other side, fiscal policy has shifted towards balanced budgets, austerity. Again, one could argue this is to do with controlling prices and preventing the government from taking that more proactive role in the economy of taxing the rentier and steering policy in the direction that we might want to go. And I think I'll move forward. Next slide, please. So how do we deal with these problems? Well, I've done a lot of work on how you can steer credit into the right sectors of the economy by creating state investment banks, which seems to be something Poland has some history and has been doing, even if they're not shouting about it. There does seem some good evidence of that. But in the post-war period, many central banks worked with ministries of finance to steer credit to those sectors of the economy, particularly high value-added manufacturing, export sectors, and suppress credit to the housing market, to the mortgage market, and other undesirable sectors. So I think we need to see a return to that. Obviously, I would reject the fiscal austerity that we've seen and this tight focus on inflation. And we need to move taxation away from incomes and on to rents. And my director, Mariana Mazzucato, director of my institute, has been pushing this idea very much that industrial policy needs to feature much more strongly, that states should focus on missions and direct all policy spheres towards these missions, the most important one of which, of course, is the transition to a green economy. I'll leave it there. Thank you.